I have the great privilege of working with the San Mateo County Health System right now, and when I look around at all of the great people in that system and what they've learned from Susan and what they brought to Susan, I also know that Susan is a great lean leader. And then the third way that I know is when people can produce information for that advance the entire field, like this article. I've only known about this model of coaching and teaching for about 6 months now, 5-6 months, and it's already been of incredible value in not just my work, but the work of our company and all around the country. So with that, you're in for a treat learning about this model directly from the source. Thank you very much, and introduce Susan Ehrlich.
Okay, now I'm fully embarrassed. I was already feeling very honored to be here, and the things you just said about me I don't really relate them to myself as a person, but thank you, I really appreciate that. I wanted to also really thank Louise for being so kind about what I brought to San Mateo, and I just want to say that it really just wasn't about me. It's about this team who is all assembled so nicely in front of me here. Dr. Knopfli and I think we were really improvement partners. And it was Dr. Knopfli and the other people at San Mateo, not just in the medical center and clinics, but throughout the health system that really made it such a special place. And it's just delightful to see you all continuing on that improvement journey. So I'm going to talk about, let's see if this works. Yes. These are 5 things I'd like to talk about today. A little bit just about ZSFG, Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital, and our improvement journey, just to kind of get you a little bit on the same page. And then, of course, talking about principle-based leadership, which was the subject of the article. And then hopefully the technology works for us. Steve is a genius. But I wanted to bring in the thoughts of ideas and ideas, not just my own, but other leaders in the organization, and see what they have to say about improvement. And then last but not least, I'd love to hear your reflections. I think we have about an hour together, and it would be great to have a discussion about these, about our journey, what you think of it, about the behaviors, and what you think of those, and then how we can all do better in this journey that I know everyone in this room is really devoted to. So let's start. Just so everybody starts out on the same page, I think since you're all from the Bay Area, you probably know a little bit about Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital. Actually, the full name of our hospital is quite long, and the California Department of Public Health had to change the form so that it fit. And the full legal name of our organization is the Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital and Trauma Center. So, but I say ZSFG, it's much easier. And you can see that we have quite an impact in the community. We serve almost 107,000 patients a year. Most people think of us as the level 1 trauma center for San Francisco and northern San Mateo County. But you can see in terms of the numbers, the trauma activations are pretty small in the scheme of things. And that actually our outpatient visits are the biggest thing that we do by the numbers. And you can also see that we have quite a lot of emergency department visits, urgent care visits. Babies born, happily, that number is going up with our new labor and delivery center with our new hospital. And we employ quite a number of people on campus, 3,400 from the Department of Public Health, and about almost 2,000 people from UCSF are on campus. So it's a big organization, it's very complex, and it presents a really interesting challenge for how you execute on lean philosophy and tools in an organization of this size and complexity. And one of the things that I will say, Lean and Leap, actually, at San Mateo, felt very embedded by the time I left. And one of the most important qualities that ZSFG was looking for when it recruited its CEO about 1.5 years ago was a lean leader. So I came into an organization that was eager for a leader who embraced the philosophy and tools. And so I was the luckiest person in the world to be able to come there and really come into an organization that had already started on its journey and was eager to have a leader who embraced the philosophy. And this is the journey. You can see it started well before I arrived in April of 2016. But in 2011 was when the journey started. And it's interesting that what I found quickly when I got there was that San Mateo's journey and ZSFG's journey were very, very similar. And Louise talked about this journey. And I'm going to talk about it, just really repeat what you said, but talk about it in slightly different terms. The first part of the journey that you can see so nicely coordinated by the color orange there is about adopting the tools. The tools, ZSFG really adopted the tools. You can see many, many value streams, and then of course subsequent Kaizen events, improvement events that resulted from those value streams. And that happened between 2011 and 2016. And just like in San Mateo, we were noticing that all those tools, using all those tools, wasn't really adding up. It wasn't resulting in the kind of sustained improvement that we wanted. And so just like San Mateo, the leaders of Zuckerberg San Francisco General made the trek to Appleton, Wisconsin to learn how to do the daily management system. And then, of course, started there. And that included those three green bubbles, which were our model cells for adopting the daily management system. And in April, actually in May of 2016, about 3 weeks after I arrived, we moved into our new acute care tower. How many people in this room have been involved in moving into a new hospital? Right. So you know what that is. That upends everything, and it disrupts everything. And it is an incredibly humbling experience. And it did disrupt us for a while. We're about 1.5 years out from that now. And it took, for an organization that had spent as many years using lean tools to plan for that move, it was an incredibly humbling experience to see what happens when you actually move in and you start working in an organization that is completely different. So we moved into a 2016 era hospital out of a 1972 era hospital. And if you think, I think people thought that by moving into a brand new building with, you know, beautiful space and single rooms for patients and 59 rooms in the emergency department instead of 16, that all of our problems would be solved. And that wasn't the case at all. So that was a humbling experience. And I think it also it prompted us to think differently about our improvement journey. And now we are in a different phase, the third phase of our improvement journey, which really has to do with leadership behaviors. And that's what I want to spend more time talking about. Cynthia, you talked about your true north. This is our true north. This triangle is pervasively displayed throughout the organization. And it starts at the top with patients and our community. Being a safety net hospital, community is a really important part of this. I think a lot of places talk about community, but as a safety net organization, I think we have a different kind of a responsibility to the community to really put that first and foremost. Vision, mission, values. It's interesting to see that one of our values is joy in our work, so I'm very happy to have a book about joy because I'll learn new things about how to make sure that that's actually part of what we do every day. And then our true north goals, which are probably similar to many of your own: equity, safety, quality, care experience, workforce care and development, and financial stewardship. I think the one that might be a little different for our organization is equity. And it's one that we're really learning about how to execute on. It's a challenging one that goes into areas that, especially now and today in our society, are really critical for us, but also very emotional for people to take on. And then the bottom, the ZSFG way, how we align, enable, and improve, this is really getting at those behaviors that we were talking about. X matrix, you probably have seen these before. And these are, this is just, I'm just flashing this so you can see that our True North goals are strategic A3s, the performance drivers that are aligned with the strategies, and the long-term outcomes, that we have this all lined up. I wish it was as beautiful as Dr. Shannon's organization seems to be, but we're really working on it. So this is about why we care about leadership. And this is a different way of showing what happens in organizations that don't adopt the behaviors that I believe we need to in order to move forward. So this results in tools. This is the, somebody in our organization said this is the basic crack of improvement, right? You use the tools, you get results, you use the tools, you get results, but it doesn't really add up to a holistic improvement. And it's really what I call episodic-based improvement. When we go into the daily management system, we're creating an environment for daily change. Louise, you talked about that, episodic versus daily. So bringing in the daily management system is really about changing the environment and relationships. But ultimately, in order to get the results we need, we really need principles that are reflected in behaviors that we use in the organization every day. And this is really the Shingo model. This is what principle-based leadership is about. And then again, these principles align, enable, and improve. This is the ZSFG way. I'm going to skip through this. And this is another way that we look at it throughout the organization. And you can see there, align, enable, and improve. And what is aligning? Well, that's about strategic direction and the X matrix, and it's about training our leaders in A3 thinking. Enabling is principle-based leadership, leader-standard work, having a no-meeting zone. I care is our patient-centered care. And then improvement is really mostly about the tools that I talked about. So how do we approach principle-based leadership with our leaders? And this is what we've been doing step by step, and we're starting to see how this pays off. So the first thing is A3 thinking training. We have really skilled teachers in A3 thinking. It's a 2-day class that is, there's one day and then there's improvement labs and another day. And we've trained several hundred people in the organization to adopt A3 thinking. And this is really the core of improvement, and it's the core of what we expect as leaders. The second thing we did, and we did this about almost a year ago now, is we did 360 evaluations, starting with our executive team, and then moving on to our expanded executive team, which is about 53 organizational leaders. And this is a 360 evaluation that is unlike any 360 evaluation that you've seen. It's really about lean leader behaviors, and I'll show you how that works. From the 360, each of our leaders was tasked with developing a personal development plan, A3. How many of you have ever worked on a PDP A3? So it's just like any other A3 with all the, the left side, the right side, but it's about you. And so we all had to dig deeply within ourselves, take a look at those 360 evaluations, and put that in the discipline of creating an A3. And then that A3 then transitioned into leader standard work and how we use our no meeting zone. Let me show you a little bit more about that. So this is a 360 evaluation. This is a very high level way of showing it. And you can start to see those behaviors that John Toussaint and I wrote about in the article. And this is a really great visual way of showing where you're doing well and where you're not. And this is not mine. I have one that looks it looks a little bit, mine kind of looks like a puppy. This one doesn't quite look like that. This is actually Dr. Jim Marks, who's our Chief of Performance Excellence. And you can see quickly where he needed to focus his efforts. And this is a picture of his PDPA3. So you can see the thinking, the thought, reflection, and the discipline that goes into this. So now let's talk about leader standard work. This, you can see almost a year ago now, this was my leader standard work that came out of the PDPA3. And one thing that you might notice about this is that it's actually on a sheet of paper, right? things take a long time at CSFG, and I hadn't gotten a whiteboard yet. And so I was determined to have leader standard work, even though I didn't have a whiteboard. And so I put it up on a piece of paper, 2 pieces of paper. This was version 4. I think the first one was on 1 sheet of paper. And it shows daily and weekly improvements. And you can see the green and the red, and you can see kind of, where I was doing well and where I wasn't. So in March of 2017, this was my leader standard work. And you can see that I got my whiteboard. It's a big whiteboard. It's about the biggest you can buy, I'm told. And it was quite a mechanical event to get it up on the wall. But you can see that on the left side here, we have the true north triangle, of course, the X matrix, and then daily, weekly, and monthly standard work. And on the right side of this board are all of our strategic A3s. At CSFG, we went from 10 strategic A3s to 7 in our second planning cycle. We're about to go through this again, and so I'm pretty sure we'll get below 7. But you can see the evolution of standard work that happened for me personally. And in September today, my board looks pretty similar to this, but there's just a few changes. But I'm always thinking about what it needs to have on it. And I got some great ideas from Dr. Shannon about what kinds of things that he does every day and how that might affect my standard work. Here's examples of other standard work in the organization. So you can see that it really looks different from person to person. But the main thing is that people have it, that it's based in their PDA-PA3 and their 360 evaluations. I'm curious, how many folks in the organization have used 360 evaluations that are based on lean leader behaviors? Well, you don't count, Jenna. It's definitely something to think about. Okay, so now, because I really have done enough talking, what I wanted to do was I wanted to show you what other people think about leadership in the organization. And one of the things that I want you to notice here, just to start out, you're going to hear from 2 of our leaders. Both of them are physicians. And so in contrast to Dr. Shannon's experience, but consistent with my experience at San Mateo and at CSFG, we found that physicians actually have taken this up even better than anyone else in the organization. And I think as I reflect about why that is, I think there are 2 reasons. First of all, we give our physicians time to do it. So it's an express part of their day. And secondly, I think it's really very much part of our medical training. The PDSA process is very consistent with medical training. It's like writing a SOAP note. SOAP notes, writing an A3, it's very similar. And physicians, I think if you give them time, they will come, and they will do this work incredibly well. So now, I have to get him to play. He's our medical director, he's our chief medical experience officer. He's also our medical director of risk management. So he has a very important role in the organization, and you're going to hear about it now if I can. Hey Jeff, would you introduce yourself?
Of course. Hi, I'm Jeff Critchfield. I'm the chief medical experience officer at Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital. I'm also the medical director of risk management here and a professor at UCSF.
That's great. Tell us what you think it takes to be a great leader these days.
Oh gosh. These days, what I think about that is what's helped me is having a very clear vision of how what I do as a leader and a provider here at the hospital impacts people's lives. So on challenging days, I hang on to that. I'm like, this makes a difference for people. That helps me a lot.
That's great. And what prepares you to be a great leader?
The thing that I think that's prepared me the most, one is temperament, and the temperament is I'm a very curious person. And then combined with my curiosity, I put a lot of effort into getting skills and talents to ask questions and to listen. So that's helped me a lot.
That's great. And what advice would you give to graduates of the CHCF Healthcare Fellowship Program?
To this audience, I think the thing that I'm working with now that I would suggest to you is how do you most embrace and be excited by and not deterred by change, and seeing the excitement in change. And the quote I use that helps me with that is by a guy named Viktor Frankl, wrote a book called In Pursuit, Man in Search of Meaning, who survived a Holocaust camp. And his quote was, when you're faced with a situation you can no longer change, you're challenged with changing yourself. Which, by analogy for you all, your unit, your hospital, your network, and probably what's going on now, our healthcare system.
Wow, that's great.
So what I neglected to say is that I did these tapes for a talk that I'm going to be doing in another week or so for CHCF, California Healthcare Foundation Healthcare Leadership graduates. And so he's going to be speaking again to that group. But I wanted to bring it here because I thought what he said was really poignant. And Jeff he's an amazing thinker and leader. And I wanted to just summarize what I thought I heard him say, which is, he's all about being persistent, right? He wants to have a very clear vision about how what we do impacts others' lives, and to have that with him every single day. He's also curious, right? He talked a lot about asking questions and listening. And he, more than many people I know, is willing, and he's willing to embrace change, and he's willing to look at that himself. I wanted to just take you back to his quote for a minute, because that also has a lesson in it. And this guy that he was speaking about, Viktor Emil Frankl, was an Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, and a Holocaust survivor. And think about this quote when you think about where he came from. When you're faced with a situation you can no longer change, you're challenged with changing yourself. And what's that really about? That's about humility. And it's one of the most important qualities of a leader, I think, that is the least well appreciated. Okay, let's hear from Ellen.
Hey, Ellen, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good.
Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, I'm Ellen Chen. I'm in the San Francisco Health Network, and I'm the Primary Care Director of Population Health and Quality.
Thank you.
And cohort 11.
Cohort 11. Can you tell us these days, what does it take to be a great leader in healthcare?
It feels right now like there's a lot of change going on. I think at this point, one of the traits that I've seen in leaders, great leaders in healthcare, is resilience, actually. So being able to tap into what inspires yourself, but also those around you, your team, your organization, to keep the work going in times of change.
That is a great reflection. And what best prepares you to be a great leader?
I'm still preparing. I'm still constantly learning. I think that I was lucky enough to be raised by family and to have positive educational experiences to make it feel like constantly learning about new things and constantly wanting to improve is interesting. It's good, and that it's fun. So that actually helps me, I think, approach my work. And the other thing is, in the past, other experiences like the fellowship have helped me, I think, have a framework to keep learning, to feel like I have a way to reflect on my experiences and to learn from my mistakes, and to bring my authentic self as an Asian American woman and to connect that with success and leadership.
I love that. What advice would you give to these folks who are graduating from the CHCF Healthcare Leadership Fellowship Program?
I would say find that point of inspiration. for yourself and for your organization, and help people connect to that.
Excellent. Thanks, Ellen.
So one thing that was interesting about what Ellen said that I want to connect back with Dr. Shannon is, she talked about finding a point of inspiration for people, right? So, and Dr. Shannon talked about the same thing. He talked about connecting the improvement work to things that were inspiring for others in the organization. So I thought, I didn't, obviously I wasn't thinking about that when I was listening to Ellen talk, but I do think it's consistent with what he was saying. And Ellen is saying, she's talking about persistence, right? Resiliently embrace change. It's interesting how both Jeff and Ellen talked about change, right? A lot. And I asked them, I think you might notice, I asked them the same 3 questions. I did not prep them beyond that. These are people who I would say are really good leaders, and specifically good lean leaders. And they both talked about very similar things. She talked about being curious and learning from others. And then being self-disciplined, to reflect, to be your authentic self. That was one thing that she said that I really loved, and I think is really important to this work, is that you have to find your authentic self and connect it to the work. Working towards improvement, and you might have missed this, but she actually said it, to have fun. So these 2 people actually touched on these 5 things, and these were the 5 things that Dr. Toussaint and I wrote about. The leadership behaviors that drive improvement. And there was a lot said in that article about why these behaviors, why they're important, but basically they've been studied in many organizations and were found to be the most connected to actual improvement in the organization. Willingness, curiosity, humility, perseverance, and self-discipline. And I wanted to just go through each of those and just talk a little bit about each one. I wanted to bring forth a quote from the article and then kind of summarize what it was, and then I really like to stop and hear from you all what you think about these behaviors, how you've adopted them in your organization or had tried to promote them in your organization, and how you think this works. So the first is willingness, and the quote from the article is that leaders cannot address unproductive organizational traits without being open to extricating these traits from themselves. Us. We as healthcare leaders must assume responsibility for poor patient outcomes as well as staff and physician burnout. And so the summary here is, to embrace change, you have to be willing to do so yourself. You have to change what you do. And for me, I've found it easier to do that with the leader standard work. You could see the pictures of what I showed you before. It allows me to really focus on the things that are most important every day. But if we don't change ourselves as leaders, nobody else around us is going to change. The second is humility. The capacity for humility is essential for leading complex teams where participants are often more expert than leaders in a particular area. Effective leaders know they don't have all the answers and are willing to respect workers by asking open-ended questions and seeking input. And what I've noticed is that humility is often the last behavior effective leaders adopt. Of all of these, it's the toughest one. Why is that? Because when we're selected to be leaders, humility is typically not one of the things that we're selected because of, right? It's because we're tough charging people and we have all the answers and we know how to stand up in front of people and tell them what to do. That is the antithesis of humility. And so, this is a really interesting one to coach and mentor around. Curiosity. You have to be willing to go see, to ask oneself, did I unleash the creativity of my team by asking them about how things work and how they should work? Did I see barriers that I could remove? And that would allow them to solve things on a day-to-day basis. And this, to me, is about asking why until you get to the root of the problem. I think Dr. Shannon said, people come to us with symptoms. They come to us with symptoms. And so we have to be willing to ask why. We have to be courageous enough to stop and ask why. Perseverance is the persistence to attack any problem and the belief that no problem is unsolvable. I think, I don't know what you call it. Some people, there's a whole book called Grit. Ferocious resolve is another term I've heard used. But great leaders have to believe that no problem is unsolvable, right? Because the toughest problems are always left for the leaders to solve. And so if we throw up our hands and think that they can't be solved because we tried it 10 times and it didn't work, then we shouldn't be the leaders. We have to have that grit to keep moving. And then finally is self-discipline. Sustained great results depending on building a culture full of self-disciplined people who take disciplined action. This is about having a structure for improvement, right? And we have to have a structure to improve. If you don't know where you're starting, you aren't going to know where you're going. So you have to have a structure. And I think, I'm preaching to the choir in this room, right? Having the lean philosophy, having the lean tools, this is the structure that we use to improve. So these are those 5 behaviors I just went through. This is what I talked about. And I guess now I'm just curious to hear what you guys think. What do you think about these behaviors? How visible do you see them in your organization? Do you think these are the right behaviors? Are there some missing? I would just love to hear your thoughts about this. And also, how critical are they to the improvement journey? Do we have to have leaders adopting these behaviors to improve? What else do we need to do that? Thank you, Louise.
I think I was telling you in the ladies' room how excruciatingly difficult it is to make these changes. So, that just is what it is. It's very hard. I found the article very helpful, and I think the little spider web thing could be developed as a helpful standard work kind of tool, and I've been trying to do that. What I would say is that I think they are the right behaviors, and one reason I think that is that in our work, when we have made the effort to make the principles very evident in our work with others in problem solving, for example, respect for others, asking questions, being present, not only are the staff more engaged around the problem solving, but we as leaders are much more engaged and passionate around it. And all of the discussions that we have about the progress is way better. And so, I think it speaks for itself. Maybe there'd be some tweaking, but I think it's just that it is profoundly difficult to do this. And I'm so blown away by your leader standard work and your visual management of that. I just want to go over there and copy it. Thank you.
Yes, well, anybody, I can show it to you again. Thank you for that. It's, I think the important thing about this is that you have to start somewhere. How many people in this room have leader standard work or any standard work? Yeah. So why do you have leader standard work? Yeah, that sounds good. That's why I have it up there. It's interesting, you can't really see what's up there, but the features of mine are Gemba, going to the Gemba, going to see, what people are doing out there. I actually have divided it into what am I looking for when I go out there. So you can see it's kind of subdivided, which was an improvement. Learning, practicing humble inquiry, seeing alignment to true north, and then actually better understanding patient experience. So what I found was when I just had Gemba huddle up there, that wasn't specific enough for me. I needed to really break it down to what do I want to be doing when I'm out in the workplace. So let me just put it down, and then I can see and I can track week to week, month to month. How am I doing on those separate things? Yeah.
Oh, it's a question.
Yes.
So you can finish your thought. Then
No.
I can ask my question.
The other thing, the other thing that's important about my leader standard work is that there are things that are personal on here as well, and that's one of the things when I went to Stanford to see what they were doing with leader standard work. It was really interesting to see the types of personal things that people had on their boards. Mine has to do with exercise, and anybody who knows me knows why that's up there, because that's kind of my go-to for being able to reflect and get centered. But I also have up there, as a tribute to my former leader before Louise, active transport. So I try to actively get out of my car. Took Bart over here. I can put a green dot for the week. So, leader standard work can be a lot of things that are important. It's not just the organizational things. I'm a firm believer that we have to be balanced as human beings in order to lead the work of the complex organizations that we do. So there's a lot of things that people's leader standard work can be different things. Yes. Well, there's a couple of ways of approaching that. So the first thing, when I came into the organization, I wanted to create leadership structures where those behaviors took place. So we didn't really have an executive team at ZSFG before I came, so I wanted to create an executive team of leaders who practiced these kinds of behaviors every single week. And then an expanded executive team. So the executive team is 14, the expanded team is 53. So I created those structures, and within those meetings, we're looking at A3s. We're demonstrating our leader standard work. We're doing countermeasure summaries and other kinds of lean tools. We're looking at dashboards. So just creating a structure where people have time baked into their week or their month to do that. The other part of it is coaching and mentoring. And so part of the standard curriculum for leaders, one is A3 thinking training, another is coaching and mentoring training. And so part of my job with my folks is tracking. Have you done your PDP A3? Where are you with it? Do you have leader standard work? How are you doing with it? Going to their offices, seeing what they have on their boards, walking with them into the Gemba. So it's creating structure and time. And then it's things like being very disciplined about how we purchase physician time from the university, for example. Making sure that each department has time devoted to this work. That when we're purchasing medical director time, for example, that time is aligned with this work. So there are many ways of creating time, and it's just kind of going through and making sure that, especially the leaders, that we've been focused on leaders are building this into their days. I'm sorry, you had a question first.
Yes, my question was that in previous years, healthcare was following more or less like a business process, where you knew that you do this, it results in this, something like that. But then came the current generation where it's constantly in change. Like things change so fast. You are talking in terms of regulations, you're talking in terms of processes, how you do healthcare. For example, from doing a lot of tests now into outcomes. So those are changes which we find in healthcare. So my question was based on your willingness, humility, curiosity, perseverance, self-discipline. I see healthcare more as more of a creative process now. That you just have that element of creativity to adapt to the changes and still stay afloat, and being able to float with the changes that are coming within the system at any given moment in time. So how does that fit in with these key principles, that creative process of doing healthcare business?
Well, let me make sure I understand the question. But what I think you're saying is there's change happening all the time in healthcare. And in order to keep afloat, we need to be creative in the way that we focus on problems in the organization so that we can stay adept as a business. I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, so the changes come so frequently, whether it's regulatory changes or just the way we do we do business in healthcare. But then I'm now trying to relate that to the type of leader
Yes.
who can
Yes.
adapt to those frequent changes. What are
Yes.
the characteristics as far as this is concerned?
Yes.
So I was saying healthcare is more now departed from being a business process where we knew that this leads to this leads to this, which was straightforward. But now it has turned into being a creative process where changes are so spontaneous and things come so fast that you don't have enough time to think as if you are still operating within a business process. But now you think more so fast in a creative process rather.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I have a great answer for that, but I'm just thinking back to the events of past weekend, right? Anybody who was in the Bay Area this past weekend knows it was really, really hot, right? And as a trauma center, every hospital in San Francisco was extremely busy. And Cynthia and I were comparing notes. I think we were the two busiest hospitals. And that created all kinds of problems that we hadn't really thought of before. So for example, or we hadn't anticipated, we probably could have. So for example, our clinical lab is in our 1972 era building. And the building got so hot that we actually that the machines started breaking down. And the facilities people had to bring in dry ice and fans, literally, to keep the machines running. And in the end, we had to transfer a lot of our labs to, first to Parnassus and then to Mission Bay, because Parnassus was also heating up, and so we all had to send our stuff to the newest hospital in town. But it's these crisis situations that are constantly, changing and we're constantly adapting to. And I would say, I think what's important is the discipline of applying improvement to every single thing that's happening. So, what are we going to do next time? What were the root causes of the problems that we faced over the weekend that we need to look at and analyze and make sure that they don't happen again? To the extent that we can, without buying a whole new building and a whole new set of machines in the lab, what can we do differently that will allow those failures, those defects never to happen again? I think also back to what Dr. Shannon said about the GI specialists who wanted, who said, well, we need a new building because we have all these new things that we're doing and we just don't have enough space. Having the discipline to ask why 5 times and making sure that we're, really getting, down to the root of what's going on in any given area. So we can have creativity, we can have things that are changing really quickly, but at the same time, we're approaching each of those questions with the same discipline and rigor and improvement mindset that we would. Yes.
When you opened the discussion, you mentioned what resources could be used, and I was wondering, how do you identify technology that can help supplement your performance improvement efforts? And the second part of the question is, how can that technology find you?
Well, we're not blessed with a lot of great technology at the General. I would say one of the biggest barriers we have in terms of doing improvement work is having adequate data to feed back to the organization on a daily basis. We look at a lot of data, and a lot of it is painstakingly produced by hand because we don't have any other way of doing it. Thankfully, we're going to be changing. We have, I think, 62 different applications that we pull from to create data. We're going to be adopting an enterprise-wide EHR in the summer of 2019, which is going to help us a lot. I know it's not the be-all and end-all. It's really, but it also gives us an opportunity to address workflows that are failing us right now, like in our revenue cycle or in many other parts of the organization. So I would say the biggest barrier we have is not having enough data because people are hungry for it. We have visibility walls. We want people to be looking at data every day, and they do by and large, but it's really hard to get it. And I would say that's the biggest barrier. Did I answer your question? Okay. Oh my God. We have an ancient version of LCR. We have Pulse Check in our emergency department. We have, same as San Mateo, Avatar, Envision. I mean, we have, you name it, we have it. It's a strategy that we should have put aside long ago, but that will change for us soon. Yes.
How often do you reflect on your spider graph or your radar graph? And then how do you validate the changes that you're trying to make? So if your humility, you think potentially is a 3, and then if you did your 360, maybe you're actually a 4, or maybe a 2. How often do you look at that, and then how often do you try to validate that?
Well, we are just about to do the 360 survey again. So we piloted it with the executive team just about a year ago now. So we'll be doing that again. And then with the expanded executive team in the spring. So the formal 360 evaluation, which is pretty painstaking, we'll be doing that again for the second time. And I'm really excited about that because it will give us a way to see, to try to validate it again, to see what kind of improvements, we've all made in all of those areas. But I would say these behaviors are part also of coaching and mentoring on a daily basis, and a weekly basis, and a monthly basis. So we have that basis of data that we got from the 360 survey, but it's really part of an ongoing thing that we have to be looking at every day. And it's about how we coach and mentor others, other leaders who are reporting to us, is I think really what we rely on.
And so then your team, your coaching,
Yeah. Yes.
and then so when you're coaching them, you're thinking about.
Yeah, and I think when this gets really, really good, people are doing it for themselves. Like they're reflective enough and humble enough to really understand where their flaws are, and so they are going to be coaching and mentoring themselves. That's what we would aspire to, but it really, it relies on each level of leadership. And willingness to see, how well you're doing on a daily basis. But the 360 we're just about to do again, which will be fun.
Susan, I have a question.
Yes.
So those 5 behaviors, I actually have been reading and, following you very closely, are traits. In a sense, they're traits that if you do this, then you are courageous. Courage is something that is the result of something. Do you actually get to the behavior piece when you're coaching, like, I speak up, I'll take a risk, and therefore I become, I am showing evidence of courage. I'm just curious about the next level down of what that curiosity, how that translates to a desired behavior. And do you help people understand these are the behaviors that are connected with that? Because they're such big buckets.
They're big buckets, and there actually are, I didn't mention this, but it's important. When we created the 360 survey ourselves, and we actually had little work groups who aligned specific behaviors with each of these bigger buckets. And so when we asked the 360 survey, it was much more specific than this. So we really are looking for specific behaviors. And I don't have those here, so I don't have the questions, but yes, you're right. I mean, you have to get very granular. This is a little bit too high level. You have to get granular with the specific behaviors, like, curiosity, humility, asking open-ended questions, right? That's something that you can see somebody do, you can watch them do, and you can give feedback about, right? Louise?
I know you mentioned that you were really engaged, partly based on your being a lean leader. Have you had to do anything to increase the feeling of safety among the leadership to be able to participate in some of this kind of re-engineering of their leadership that may be somewhat well established over many years. I mean, for example, the 360 degree and going down that path. It sounds like having people participate in the development of that might have supported safety. But are there other things that come to mind?
I'm just thinking of different, people naturally take this up at different paces, right? And for some people, it's really hard to face this stuff down. And you have to use your own judgment about how quickly you go with people, how much in your face you want to be about it, how much you allow a process of self-discovery. I think that's really personal as a leader, right? And depends on different circumstances of the organization. I think, maybe at the University of Virginia, it's easier to just, say goodbye to everybody all at once. It's a little bit harder in a public organization to do that. And the expectations are different. So you also have to take that into account. You just have to weigh the pros and cons of how fast you want to move all your leaders on this stuff, if there's one or two leaders who are really getting in the way of the group, then it's just a judgment call, I would say. And do all of our leaders practice these behaviors perfectly, including me? No way, right? And that's what part of the journey is. And I would say the next phase of the journey for us is something that I'm excited about, and Jen is actually doing some really interesting work to look at the different parts of our organization that are getting really outstanding results, and then to match those parts of the organization with their uptake of the tools, the behaviors, the practices, and to see where there's correlation and where there isn't. And generally we can see the correlation, but there are really interesting areas where, for example, the tools are in place, the practices are in place, but we're not getting some of the results. And conversely, we have places that are getting really good results, but they haven't adopted any of the behaviors. So there are examples of both of those on opposite ends of the spectrum. Generally, what we see is that where we've put the tools, the behaviors in place, we get the results. But then getting really focused on what's most important in adopting the behaviors, I think, is the next phase of our journey, because we don't want to overwhelm people with tools and behaviors that they need to take on. We want to make sure that we're just asking people to do exactly what they need to do to get results. Yeah, yes.
Hi, I was curious about the 5 behaviors. It looked like on the spider web that you showed earlier, there were many other facets of behaviors, and I wasn't sure if they were more ancillary or secondary, or how you picked these 5. And then a second related question to what the conversation that was just happening is around performance management for your leadership, and if you've looked at performance in these measures related to your leadership performance evaluations, management.
Well, the whole topic of performance evaluations is a very challenging one in the city and county of San Francisco. We don't have, we have a tool that we have to use, and we just have to use it. And it's a long-term process to change the way the performance evaluation tool looks. So I think what we try to do is do the best with what we have, and to try to personalize it to incorporate these behaviors and set goals that are appropriate. I'm just getting back to the radar chart. So the radar chart goes in, it has the 5 behaviors on it, but I would say it's really more parts of, it's kind of going deeper into each one. So you can see on there willingness, humility, curiosity, perseverance, and self-discipline. So you see all those on there. And part of it, so willingness, leader standard work. So they're related behaviors. It's just getting a little bit more specific with the general behavior. So it's just more explication, I guess, of each of the behaviors to make the radar chart more complete. Yes.
Susan, so you talked a bit about the sort of pace of adoption of
Yeah.
some of this work, and I was reflecting on the leader standard work. And for me, that really is sort of how it's hard to do, but creating that leader standard work is really that self-discipline. It's creating that structure to hold yourself accountable. And for me, it really takes as you said, a lot of teams sort of work at a different pace, and so you really have to have patience, and so that perseverance is really key as well. So what, maybe you can talk a bit about what you've seen, not necessarily with the leaders, but with more frontline staff and supervisors on sort of what's an indicator that they have actually adopted some of this work?
Yeah, that is a great question. So what I love to see is when I go out to, so there's one unit in particular that I would kind of say is the 5-star unit, which is one of our inpatient units, 6264. And they have a great manager who, no matter what day I go up to that unit, I go up there at 2:30 and there is always a huddle every single day. And every single time I'm there is widespread participation in that huddle. There are, line staff who are talking actively about what's going on. They are engaged in problem solving. So for example, one of the safety problems that we've been struggling with in our unit is falls, and in particular falls with injury. Not unit, the hospital. And that unit has really, every time there's a fall, it's up on the wall. They've paraded out, the circumstances of the falls. People are talking about, the PDSAs that they're doing to try to prevent falls. So that's when I see it, is when I go onto a unit and there's active participation from everyone there. That's how you know, right? And there's versions of that throughout the organization, but I think that's really it. And so then it's understanding, what is it about that leader? What is she doing? How is she being coached and mentored? What's different or unique about that place in the organization versus other parts of the organization? This to me is just a fascinating area of study, and what I think we're going to need to understand better in order to really make sure that improvement is widespread throughout the organization and aligned all the way up and down.
You just talked about coaching with regard to the 360 evaluation. Could you say a little bit more about what that looks like? How is it structured? Who's coaching whom? What's the frequency? Could
Yeah.
you just talk a little bit more about that?
So the way we designed it was that we have this tool that was administered, and I think every executive got, somewhere between 8 and 14 people who commented on them in the 360 evaluation. So those results were received back, and then they were kind of processed in large and small groups with facilitators. We also made sure that all those folks were able to participate in a training about coaching and mentoring. And then it's up to their one-ups to follow through on those results and make sure that each of the sequential things is happening. Did they got their 360? How are they reflecting on it? Have they put together their PDPA3? What shape is it in? Have they adopted their leader standard work in accordance with the PDPA3? So it's a combination of having the tool, doing some group process around it, and then relying on the leaders to coach and mentor their folks. And as you might imagine, that's variable, right? Some people are really good at it. For example, our chief quality officer, he reports to me. And so he really took seriously his 360. There was good and bad news for him in that tool, and we talked openly about it. He created Leader Standard Work. And he subsequently then coached and mentored his whole team to have Leader Standard Work. And so you can see that, right? I mean, you go to his unit and you see his work, you see what he does with his team, you see their work together, and you can see, you know, how effectively they're approaching problems, creating A3s. You know, you can, it's not a mystery. When this is working, you can see it happening. And I have to rely on him as a leader to spread that through his organization. It doesn't happen that way everywhere. So I think it's just, you know, these behaviors, right? It's his willingness, it's his persistence, it's my persistence with all of my leaders to just continually drive this work home. And there's no mystery about it. When people are doing this, you can see it happening and it results in wins in the organization. But it's a big culture change. It is a huge culture change.
So I'm afraid we're out of time for this part. I know we're going to be shifting into the next room for lots of opportunity for group discussion and reflection. But please join me in thanking Susan for
Thank
wonderful
you, everybody.
opportunity.